name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and today I'd like to talk to you about a book I read this month and the very strange rabbit hole that it sent me down. Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, later just republished as The Coming Race, was an 1871 work published anonymously. It was an immediate success, it would seem. It's almost a stretch to call this book a novel. The concept is very simple. The main character is unnamed, as the author is, moneyed and unattached, and joins his friend on an expedition beneath the earth to follow up what his friend believes he had seen on a previous excursion. As they delve deeper into the bowels of the earth, the narrator's friend falls and dies, and the narrator is confronted with what is described as almost a dinosaur-like monster. And the next thing he remembers is waking up in a room with not quite human creatures who almost have the resemblance of angels. These people are the Vril, who have been living beneath the earth since antediluvian times, way back into human prehistory. And they have created a society which our narrator goes on to describe in great detail over the next 120 pages. As a piece of writing, as a work of fiction, this isn't quite riveting. There are a few pages on philology, some pages on agricultural practices, death rites, and all aspects of a Vril society. But there is some very interesting stuff here too. The flipping of gender roles in this society. Females are physically larger, take the lead in courtship. There seems to be absolute equality between the sexes. Their dismissive attitude of the arts and poetry. They have them, but they don't hold them in any esteem. Their rejection of the notion of nobility, being a shop owner, is seen as equally important as being the ruler of the entire society. The book is a critique, a satirical critique of the prevailing philosophical, political, scientific and cultural aspects of the day being 1871. However, the important thing to realise about this book is how that satirical critique seems to go right over the head of the audience it's intended for. People believe this book, and I can't tell you why, but a demonstration of the popularity of the book comes the following year when Samuel Butler produces Erewhon. Again, another satirical critique, this time a bit more sort of utopian about this description of Erewhon, and also, importantly, published anonymously. The book sells like hotcakes, and then it is discovered that Samuel Butler is the author of the book, and sales drop by 90%. The audience had understood that this was some kind of sequel to Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. But the authorship of the book did not stay a secret forever. We now know that this book was written by Edward George Earle Lytton Bulwer-Lytton, born in 1803, died in 1873, the first Baron Lytton, Privy Councillor, Member of Parliament representing acting for during his time in Parliament, both Whig and Tory parties, author of some 30 novels, a half dozen plays, 4 books of poetry, Secretary of State for the colonies for about a year. On the abdication of King Otto from the Greek throne, Bulwer-Lytton is offered the Greek crown. He declines it, and I can't for the life of me find out why he was offered it in the first place, but it's a nice thing to have happen, I suppose. In the early 1830s, he goes against his mother's wishes, and he marries for love, and as a result has his allowance stopped. And with anyone who is in their late 20s and suddenly has their pocket money cancelled, he had to go and get a job, and the job he chose was writer. The first couple of novels don't sell particularly well, but starting in the early 1840s with books such as Pelham, he takes off as a writer and sells well for the rest of his career. If you don't know about his novels, and I will stick my hand up here and say that I've not read any other than The Coming Race, some of the phrases of these novels you will know. In The Coming Race, he talks about the pursuit of the almighty dollar, which is something which has come into common parlance. The pen is mightier than the sword is one of his. The great unwashed is another one of his phrases, which people still use, mostly in political circles. His novel, A Strange Story, was an influence on Dracula. Bulwer-Lytton is the man who persuaded Charles Dickens to give Great Expectations a more upbeat ending, helping that author's career along. Possibly, however, his most famous turn of phrase is one that he is derided for. In fact, there is a competition which has been running for 41 years, the Edward Bulwer Fiction Contest, where a prize is given to the worst opening sentence of a book published that year. I'll read you the quote in full from the beginning of one of Bulwer-Lytton's novels. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals, when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets. For it is in London that our scene lies, raveling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. It was a dark and stormy night is just one of those phrases that has become so hackneyed. I don't know whether we're blaming the Peanuts for this. Snoopy always trying to start his novel with that line, but it has become emblematic of just an example of bad writing. And I think that's a little unfair to Bulwer-Lytton. He's not a bad writer, from what I've read. And at the time, people certainly didn't think so. 6 operas were based off of his novels and plays, including works by Wagner and by Verdi. At the time, Bulwer-Lytton is really quite popular. I don't know why Bulwer-Lytton decides to publish The Coming Race anonymously, but by accident or design it works, because people just end up believing what's been written. People believed, or wanted to believe at that time, that there is something in the centre of the earth. 50 years previously, the first Hollow Earth novel, Simsonia, is written and strikes a chord with people. After The Coming Race, there are many other examples of Hollow Earth in literature, not always with some advanced race inside. Sometimes there are dinosaurs, but you have Jules Verne, Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's a theme people go back to even as late as the 40s and the 50s, with Richard Shaver's works in science fiction magazines. But The Coming Race has a triple whammy. There is this hollow earth with a advanced society living within. There is the warning that this society at some point is going to become too populous to continue living below ground, and they're going to come upstairs and get us effectively. This is the warning at the end of the book. And the tools that Bulwer-Lytton gives this race, gives the Vril, stem from the power of Vril. This is the power of the coming race. And Vril is a liquid electricity. It is something that powers their world, powers the automata, powers their weapons. Although they are a peaceful nation, if someone attacks them, they will completely obliterate them. People really latch on to this idea of this elemental Vril force. And it is, I suppose, not enough in literature just to have a race of people who live underground. They've got to have something, some secret knowledge, some arcane, esoteric power which they are keeping from us and may use against us. And this happens with the secret societies that are hidden away as well. 30 years before the coming race, Bulwer-Lytton had written a book called Zanoni, which was about the Rosicrucians. In 1865, Bulwer-Lytton is made head of the Rosicrucians, or a figurehead for them, without his permission, and he's not particularly happy about this. Their belief in some vast conspiracy, hidden society, is an old superstition, and one which shows itself again in literature. Everything from the benign Shangri-La of James Hilton's Lost Horizon to the lost Alexandrian army in Merit's The Metal Monster. People, readers at the time, seem to have a hard job distinguishing fiction from truth, and I'm always wary of poking fun at people in previous generations for falling for this nonsense, because you only have to look around you to see the nonsense that people believe these days. The QAnon conspiracy is just the hidden society of the Rosicrucians with knobs on. The obsession over Illuminati and rings of powerful elite people really have not gone away and have just been exacerbated in the last quarter century. But again, to come back to the book, the popularity of the coming race doesn't seem to fade. 20 years after the first publication, a charity event is held at the Royal Albert Hall. The Vril Bazaar, the demonstration exhibition of the coming race. For this event, which was meant to go on for 3 days, but was so popular it went on for 5, was a mixture of stalls selling products, esoteric knowledge, magic shows, handicrafts, all centred around a giant obelisk in the middle of the Royal Albert Hall, decorated in Egyptian motifs as per the descriptions in the novel. A massive sort of Cleopatra's Needle, a tower of the Vril. There are mannequins made to look like they're flying through the rafters of the Royal Albert Hall. If I hadn't mentioned it, the Vril have mechanical wings which they use to be able to fly. And the entire event is held in support of the West London Hospital of Galvanic, and the Hospital of Galvanic Massage. And this eliding understanding of Vril equaling this new idea of harnessing the power of electricity is something that really captures the public. For sale at the Vril Bazaar, there is a stand for a beef paste drink. Now, in the 1870s, when Napoleon III is engaged in the Franco-Prussian War, he needs something concentrated and full of goodness to keep his troops going. And he comes to a man called John Lawson Johnson, who, in being able to command the vast herds of cattle across the British Empire, has found a way to render down some of this cattle into a kind of beef paste, which is liquid loveliness, which we still have today on our shelves. In the 1880s, instead of calling it whatever he was calling it before, liquid cow or something, decides on the portmanteau of bovine and Vril, taking inspiration from the coming race, and this is what we now know as Bovril. 150 years later, we're still imbibing Bovril, or spreading it on our toast, and it's owned by Unilever, a shadowy cabal of food producers. The Vril Bazaar can be seen, in a way, as the world's first science fiction convention, and it's a testament to the enduring popularity of the book that it can fill the Royal Albert Hall for 5 days in a way that most rock bands can't these days. So what happened in that intervening 20 years to ensure that the book was still so popular as a touchstone in 1891? Well, in 1875, a new movement called theosophy started in New York, and this group, who are still with us today in offices around the world, continue and perpetuate this idea of the hidden society and the secrets that society must therefore possess. Theosophy is just a product of Western esotericism bordering on the occult. Their early works are given titles such as Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. In 1896, William Scott Elliot describes life in Atlantis in a book called Atlantis and the Last Lemuria, which has airplanes powered by Vril. The links to this work of fiction are not supposed, they are quite explicitly connecting the dots where there is no dot to connect. And that hidden society and specifically Lemuria is still something that's taken on well into the 20th century with the writings of Richard Shaver for a science fiction magazine. I think it's Amazing Stories or Astounding Stories, which starts off, the editor looks at it and thinks, oh great, more fiction, hidden societies here, this is all very good. Dawns on them at some point that the writer who is sending this stuff in really believes, and the author believes it until his dying day, and convinces plenty of other people to believe it too. William Ley was a rocket engineer who defected or escaped to the US from Nazi Germany in 1937, In 1947, he writes an article for astounding science fiction called Pseudoscience in Naziland, where he claims that in 1930s Berlin there is a Vril, or there was a Vril society, where in order to give more power to their own coming race, as they saw it, the Nazi Party were off looking for weapons of occult power and potentially finding the people who controlled Vril and harnessing the power of Vril. The literary obsession in the post-war period of combining those elements of Nazis and the occult demonstrates itself to us in books like The Spear by James Herbert, or the Indiana Jones films, and even to very modern films like Iron Sky, which is subtitled The Coming Race, or Castle Wolfenstein, where all of these works are taking sort of these esoteric themes of hidden occult knowledge and mixing that with some idea of finding true Aryan heritage. Some people are just doing this for entertainment. Some people really believe this. Other people that have taken ideas of the Vril have gone in a different sort of new age direction, and some people just keep the politics out of it and just want to believe that there are still secret groups, shadowy cabals of masters who are sitting on knowledge and power, and how we might find this and share it. It sounds silly, but at trying to find examples of this online, and I think I've probably ruined my YouTube algorithm for the next month because it threw up some absurdly popular channels, people with hundreds of thousands of followers getting tens of thousands of views, still talking about Vril and vital magnetism, or finding that underground society of the Vril Yar. And all of a sudden I don't feel like laughing at the Victorian crowds at the Royal Albert Hall drinking their beef paste drink and staring at Egyptian monoliths. But if you listen very carefully, deep underground, you may hear something, and that is probably the sound of Edward George Earle Lytton Bulwer-Lytton, the first Baron Lytton, Privy Councillor, turning in his grave. And maybe there's a lesson here for all of us, that if someone offers you the Greek crown, you say yes.